Would be helpful. Well, hello, everybody. It is a pleasure to see all of you here in the room at WFRC, as well as all of our friends and colleagues online. This is the last Joint Policy Advisory Committee, or JPAC, meeting of 2022. Next year, JPAC will be coordinated by the Utah Transit Authority. Isn't that right? Okay, very good. Just making sure. Looking at Kathy also, just making sure. Okay. Let's go start with introductions, and we'll start in the room here, and then we're going to go online. We'll go around the table. Rosie, please start. Everybody remember, please speak into the microphones.
Rosie with the Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Julie Bjornstad, Long Range Planning at Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Ariel Sochmil with X Factor Strategic Communications.
Lane Thackrell, Morgan County Commissioner.
Carlton Christensen with Utah Transit Authority.
Ted Knowlton, Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Thank you. I have two microphones. This is Beth Holbrook with Utah Transit Authority.
Jeff Silverstream, Mayor of Mill Creek, and the current chair of WFRC.
Don't tell us all of your hats now, but for this room, you can give those hats. Thank you.
Andrea Pearson, WFRC.
And I'm Andrew Gruber, Executive Director here at WFRC.
Lenny Davenport, Planning Policy Director with Mountain Land Association of Governments.
Brian Levitt with Parker Levitt, a consulting firm.
Thank you for joining us from DC, Ryan.
Miranda Jones Cox, Government Affairs at Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Dave McCall, Tooele City.
Ben Hewitt with UDOT.
Andrea Olson, UDOT Planning.
Byron Lay with Dixie MPO.
On.
Kathy Griffiths, UTA.
Joel Bishop, Carlton Security.
Marianne Florence, Finance at WFRC.
Mike Sopchak, Communications at WFRC.
Mitzi Miranda with X Factor Strategic Communications.
Bert Granberg with WFRC's Analytics Group. Bob Allen with Mountain Land Association Governments.
And Jory.
Jory Johnner, Long Range Planning Group, WFRC.
Okay, and now let's go online. I'm just going to ask people to introduce themselves in the order that I'm seeing you. So let's go Amy, Ivan, Brian.
I'm Amy Rock with Penna Powers, a communications and advertising agency.
Ivan Marrero, Federal Highway Administration.
Brian Theriot with Fife County Association of Governments.
Okay, we have multiple Brians. Brian Cox, and then Jeff Acerson, Russell Robertson.
I'm security.
Another security, and also a UTA trustee. I'll fill in.
There you go.
For you. Okay, Russell.
Hi, yeah, Russell Robertson, Federal Highway Administration, Utah Division.
Mayor Ramsey, Sean Elliott, and Megan.
Hi, Dawn Ramsey, South Jordan City Mayor, and happy to see all of you, and wish I was there to say hi to our friends from DC in person. It's nice to see all of you.
I'm Sean Elliott with MAG, Transportation Director.
Hi, Megan Townsend, WFRC.
Okay, then Justin Stewart, Mayor Palmer, and Mayor Gale.
Justin Stewart with Salt Lake County Mayor's Office.
Laura Palmer, Mayor in Harriman.
Mayor Gale, you with us?
Steve Gale, Mayor Morgan.
Okay,
City.
Thank you, Mayor. Brigitte, Michelle, Jeff.
Good morning, Brigitte Mandel, Federal Highway Administration in Utah.
Michelle Carroll, Deputy Director at MAG.
Okay, let's go Jeff Scott, and then Jeff Gilbert, and then Michelle Larson. I need to use last names when we have multiples.
Jeff Scott, Box Elder County Commission.
Hi, Jeff Gilbert with the Cash MPO.
Michelle Larson, Utah Transit Authority.
Okay, Eileen Barron, Jennifer Elskin, Landis Wenger.
Eileen Barron, Communications Manager for Planning and Investment at UDOT.
Jennifer Elskin with Federal Highway Administration.
Landis, I'm the Cache County Trails and Active Transportation Coordinator.
Okay, and Andrew Jackson, Julianne, and Brian Cox, one more shot.
This is Andrew Jackson with Mountain Land Association of Governments. I'm the executive director for just a very short period of time, and Michelle's going to be taking over for me, the deputy director. So I'm here just for a little bit.
Thank you, Andrew.
Julie Fulmer. I serve as mayor in Vineyard, and I'm a representative for MAG.
Oh, Mayor Fulmer. I've never,
Yes.
I've never heard you referred to by what apparently is your full name, Julianne.
I
Welcome.
know, and it's Juliana. So.
Juliana, sorry. Welcome. Did I miss anybody in online or in the room? Anybody? Okay, great. And we may be joined by some others as we go here. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. You have an agenda in front of you and also online. It was what was sent out earlier. We've done welcome and introductions. Can I have a, did we send minutes out? We did. Of course we did. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the September meeting minutes?
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the minutes.
Second by Commissioner Fackrell. Okay, any comments or corrections on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, the minutes are approved. Okay. As we often do at JPAC, we are going to start out today by talking about Utah's Unified Transportation Plan. It is our flagship transportation effort that we all work on together across the entire state of Utah. Oh, I should say, of course, Utah's award-winning Unified Transportation Plan. It really is cited as a national model for collaboration and forward thinking in multimodal transportation. We've got three things that we're gonna talk about. One is basically on messaging, then we're gonna talk about performance measures, and then we're gonna talk about policy considerations, because the plan isn't just about building new stuff, it's also about policies. Those are the three things we're gonna talk about. As a reminder, briefly, the Unified Transportation Plan is developed over a 4-year period. Each of the transportation agencies works on their own regional plans. The state, UDOT, coordinates the rural areas long-range transportation plan. So for example, Morgan County, Tooele County, all the other rural areas of the state are officially covered under UDOT's transportation planning jurisdiction, and the urbanized areas are covered under the Metropolitan Planning Organization's planning jurisdiction. But they all integrate together into Utah's Unified Transportation Plan, right? Consistent time horizons, financial assumptions, goals and priorities. We come together as one Utah to determine the highest priorities for investment in transportation. So we should all be proud of this work. That plan is on track to be finished. The new version of the plan, which will look from 2023 out to 2050, to be finished the middle of next year. So let's say late summer, early fall completion of that plan next year. A lot of work is going into that now as we're in our sort of end stages. But what we want to start out with here is a reminder about some of the key messages that we should all understand about this plan. We have a communications team, Eileen Barron from UDOT, Mike Sobczak from WFRC, coordinate that communications team. But we're going to go to our consultant, Amy Rock with Penna Powers, who works with all of us to give us a brief reminder of key messages, and then also some interesting information about some stories at a human level that we're trying to draw out about the impact of transportation. So, Amy, take it away, please.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to share my screen here. Are you seeing it okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. So as was said, we are going to give just a status update from a communication standpoint on the plan and general messaging. So the key themes, and many of you may have seen these before, but the key themes of Utah's Unified Transportation Plan are, first, the process is sound. So we can follow Utah's Unified Transportation Plan with confidence. And I'll get back to the sub points here in just a second. But number two, Utah's Unified Transportation Plan works to preserve quality of life in Utah, even as we grow. And number three, Utah's Unified Transportation Plan offers transportation choices for all. And number four, Utah's Unified Transportation Plan builds flexibility into our transportation system in the face of uncertainty. There are many subpoints under each of these, you'll see as the plan develops, but the areas in blue, these are the areas we're focusing on for story gathering. So I'll get to that in a minute, but I know that Andrew maybe wanted to talk a little bit more about these key themes. Did you want to do anything in particular?
Well, I just want to perhaps linger on this for a moment, because I think all of us as policymakers in transportation should understand these key themes, these key benefits that emerge from our unified transportation planning process. So just let you look at these for a moment, ask all of you if anybody has any questions. One more thing I'll say is not every community is served in exactly the same way, of course, right? What happens here in Salt Lake City, where this meeting is happening, is different than what may happen in Mill Creek City or in Davis County or out in Tooele or in Morgan. Different areas of the state have different needs. What we try to do through the plan is address and aggregate all of the priority needs from all across the state, even though nobody ever gets exactly everything they want, but we work together to try to achieve the objectives across the entirety of the state. So any just thoughts or comments on what we're seeing here in the themes? Carlton.
Yeah, more of an observation. I remember when the first unified plan was adopted, it seemed like it was more, just an assimilation of the numbers and setting the picture. And it's been interesting to watch as each successive plan has come into play, that it also is now growing in what factors are feeding it and informing it, and which I think adds to the benefit of the document and the effort, because those are obviously issues affecting us as we grow, and as the state and the nature of the state becomes more and more complex. These discussions are more complex than they historically might have been, and I think the fact that we're doing our best to intake that into the process speaks well to the effort of you and others that are working to try to make that come to play.
Thanks, Carlton. And to that point, there's a lot of people in the staff of the agencies who work hard, year in, year out, month in, month out on this shared effort. And so there's a lot that goes into it. And it also puts us in a really good position. We'll get to talking about the state legislature and Congress later, but having a shared unified plan where we've together identified the highest priorities puts us in a really strong position to get funding for those priorities, because, and now back to the themes, the process is sound. We can follow the plan with confidence, right? All of these things just support what we need to do as the fastest growing state in the nation. So, okay. Okay, Amy. Now you can keep going on if you would like. Thank you so much.
Sure. Okay, so next we were just going to give an overview of the timeline and where we are. We put together the initial outline and that's been approved, and multiple agencies were given an opportunity to comment on that. And so we took some feedback, and so the outline is set. We're working right now on draft narrative, and that will go through some different levels of review, but should be approved by around the 20th of January. And then you can see how everything else kind of falls in.
Amy, I'm sorry, let me just interrupt you for 1 sec for clarification so everybody understands. When we talk about like committee review and everything, that's not so much about the projects. This is about the compilation of the plan itself and these working groups that we have among all the agencies. So they're doing the review. The substance of all of the plans goes through each of our respective agencies for approval and review. There's not actually an adoption of the unified plan, but WFRC reviews the regional transportation plan and the actual project. So Amy, I just wanted to clarify that we're talking about the unified plan as a document isn't really the right way to describe it, but the unified plan itself. Okay.
Great, thank you, yes. I don't know if there's any other questions on schedule, but this is what we're working toward. Okay. On the slide where we talked about messaging, I had some things highlighted in blue. They were some subpoints, and these are where we're talking about human-centered stories. So what we want to get to as the communications team is how, does what we do with Utah's Unified Transportation Plan affect individuals in the state? And so what we've done is we've identified on the left-hand side here, you can see the story subject areas that we want to focus on. And you can see the 4 pillars of the quality of life framework with good health, better mobility, strong economy, connected communities. Then we also want to look at some ways that past unified transportation plans have benefited Utahns. And then on the top, we have some communities that we would like represented in accordance with our theme of the plan offering choices for all. And so we've included some traditionally marginalized communities and also urban and rural. So you can see ethnic diversity, physical disabilities, rural, urban, multimodal, and economically disadvantaged. These are individuals from these groups. We are hoping to tell their stories in relation to these subject areas that we've identified. And so we've actually put out a call, and some of you may have received those, to gather stories statewide. And so right now we have about 12 ideas that we've received, and there is a Google form that people can use to submit those. We're hoping to actually wrap this up tomorrow. So I know it's really easy to fill out the form, just a couple of lines, but I'm going to give you an example here. So this person, Andres, he actually uses public transportation to get to the University of Utah and also his work. So his story, and there's much more to it than that, but his story fits into better mobility. But he is also originally from Venezuela. And so he represents an ethnically diverse community. And so that's why he is in this particular quadrant on the chart here. You can see we're really hoping to get more in the area of people with physical disabilities and how they're served by the plan, or how transportation impacts them, and then just past successes with the plan. So we would love if any of you have some story ideas, people or someone within your organization that may fit into those categories, please let us know, or really any story idea that fits in here that would be valuable to tell as part of the Unified Transportation Plan, because we find that we can communicate more through human stories than we can sometimes through charts and graphs and just words. So we're hoping to really have a robust storytelling part of the plan.
Amy, thank you.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, even though these names are in quotes, these are real people with real impacts from transportation on their lives. And even though Amy said, like, we're hoping to get this, the ideas in by tomorrow, the idea is if you have somebody in your mind, in your community that has really benefited from transportation investments or improvements, just Mike already dropped the link in the chat. And we can send it around as a follow-up to this meeting. If you have ideas about stories that might be told from somebody in your community about how transportation really helps better their lives, just give it to us, and you don't have to like worry too much about it. Just get it in and we can talk to you about it, whether it's a good thing to have highlighted in the plan. Okay, Beth?
Yes, exactly. Thanks for clarifying that, because it's really just, 2, 3, 4 sentences about the person. So it's a really quick form. We're not writing the stories yet. We're just gathering all the ideas. And then based on all the leads that we'll decide which ones to actually write in a more complete format. So you can see here, like I mentioned, please, if you have some ideas, go ahead and enter it on the Google form that's in the chat, the link in the chat. And then we're shooting to have all the ideas in by tomorrow. And then we'll review all the story ideas and include the strongest ones for the subject areas and communities in the ultimate Utah's Unified Transportation Plan. So that's where we're headed with that.
Thank you, Beth.
Thanks, Andrew. And thanks. I really appreciate this. And just so that you know, UTA does have a pretty good group for people, certainly that have physical disabilities, but also that have other, we called our now I can't remember what the CAT stands for, but anyway, it is the group with physical disabilities that do an analysis. They actually meet quarterly with our team to give us feedback. We have individuals who have multiple challenges, wheelchair bound, blind, deaf, all of those elements. And I think we could add something to that. So we'll try to do something by tomorrow.
Thank you. That's great. Okay, terrific. Thank you very much, Amy. Thanks a lot. More to come on this as we go along. We're going to keep moving on our agenda. So Bob Allen from MAG is going to come up. And before we do that, I want to make sure we're paying attention to some of our other members who have joined us. Davis County Commissioner Bob Stevenson, Laura Hanson, State Planning Coordinator with GOPB. Laura, come up here, please. Thank you very much. I mean, anybody, by the way, there's more seats at the table. So any of you that are sitting there, you can come to the table if you would like to. Okay. Okay. Now, how do we know if the unified plan is working? Like, how do we measure the performance? We should do that, shouldn't we? Of course we should. Bob Allen with MAG, talk to us about this, please.
Yeah, so just a little bit of background. Over the past 6 or 7 years, most of you probably are aware that the FHWA and the federal government has been asking more and more about performance measures. They developed performance measures that are nationwide. And so at the federal level, we have a pretty robust set of performance measures that each of us adhere to. And then each one of our individual entities, we all have our own performance measures that we use to do business, to measure what we're doing, how well we're doing. And in the interim, we've, as a unified plan group, we've wanted to say, well, how do we meld the two together to, as Andrew said, see how well we're doing? Over the past couple of plans, we've come up with a list of performance measures you can see here on the board. These are the ones that we measured last time, and we feel comfortable with continuing to measure those. You can see there's some relating to safety and economic vitality, state of good repair, the environment, mobility, et cetera. And so as a committee, we work through this trying to measure these measures across the state. It can be a challenge with the differing entities and so forth, but we do our best. What's new this time essentially was the policy committee gave us a charge to say, well, equity is also important, as we all know that's been a hot topic as of late. How do we incorporate that into our process? As the subcommittee went through that, we have determined that our method of going through this right now is, well, let's keep measuring what we're measuring now, but let's look at how that affects the demographics that we're talking about. So we've kind of adopted the Wasatch Front equity focus areas, and those are popular. These are census block groups that have either a greater than 25% low income population, greater than 40% persons of color, or greater than 10% zero car households. So our task and what we've been doing up to this point is developing that data statewide. And so we've been able to do that. This is just a snapshot of that map. It's available to be able to look in, and it doesn't just, cover the Wasatch Front, but we're able to incorporate all of the community, the entire state. Obviously, some of these census block groups are huge, and there's probably not a lot of population in them, but what our task now is, and what we've been doing right now, is we're taking those performance measures that we're already measuring, and we're saying, well, let's apply it to these specific locations and see, well, what's the difference? Is there a difference? And how do we rectify that? How do we deal with that? And so some of those measures, unfortunately, we cannot do probably at this fine of a detail or level. For example, some of our air quality monitoring, we just don't have enough monitors out to really say inside this block versus outside this block is different. But certainly when it comes to our safety measures, most of our economic vitality measures and our mobility measures, we feel comfortable that we think we can pull this off. And over the next month or two, we are going to be completing this experiment is maybe not the right term, but we're validating that, yes, we can measure these and we feel comfortable with the information we're getting. And then taking that information back to the policy committee and say, okay, how do you want to deal with this? How do we move forward with this as it relates to performance measures? To keep it brief, that's basically all I had to share. Is there any questions or comments that I could entertain?
I just want to note that Bob is the chair of the Unified Plan Subcommittee on Performance Measures.
Thank you.
Which is why he's sharing this on behalf of all the agencies. We actually just go back to the slide before this, so no, one more. The overall, yeah, okay. Just so that everybody can see all of them. Any
Yes.
comments or questions about performance measures? Carlton.
Sorry to keep having comments. I mean, one way potentially to look at it is the same way we do when we do a Title VI analysis, and that is a given area any less disadvantaged, from infrastructure improvements and those kinds of things, just to assure that we're equitably treating those areas. I mean, maybe that was the intent, but I thinking as these numbers are assimilated, that would be an interesting contrast to.
And that is, it surely is our intent, is to look
Okay.
at what's the delta of within these areas versus outside of them,
Outside of
and
them.
how do
Okay.
we deal with that?
Thanks.
Right. Thank you. Any other comments or questions about performance measurement? Just everybody online, just understand that we are carefully watching you, even if you have your cameras and your mics off. If anybody, you can speak up, you can raise a hand, because we want you, everybody online, to feel part of this conversation. Okay, so going
Thank you
once,
for your
going
time.
twice. Thank you.
Oh,
And
yes.
Oh yeah, here, speaking to the mic, please.
Do you feel from the work that you've been doing that there are enough tools in place to get an accurate performance evaluation? Or are there more things that need to be done?
Yeah, a lot of it depends on the specific measure. For example, some of these economic vitality, like economic safety, that's an easy one. We just get the data from UDOT to look at fatalities, serious injuries, etc. There are several of these that are that we are derived from the travel demand models. Some that the ones that we can't do or would be really difficult is like I mentioned, the air quality, key mobile source, ozone emissions. We just don't have a number of measurement points out there spread out throughout the state to be able to say, well, it's different from here to there. It's just, we don't have that capability.
So as far as the air goes, do you feel that in the metro areas, and I believe, KSL puts a thing out, and I think they use a lot of the utopias, put a lot of the sensors out there all through the urban areas as far as that goes. Is it more into the rural areas that you're concerned with, or how would you differentiate?
We're certainly still exploring. We haven't given up on the air quality stuff. We're still exploring places that we can get the data. We just want to make sure that we're using the same methodology for both versions of it, I guess, the equity version and the statewide version. So yes, we're still exploring those things and looking for data sources to do that. We haven't quite got to that stage where we can say, yes, we're comfortable with all of them. But yeah, we're working towards it for sure.
Well, part of the reason why I ask is, going back to the economic, is it realistically that clean air becomes a very important factor in that economic growth with people coming into our area with what they
Sure.
see. So
Sure, absolutely. We're obviously sticking within these not predetermined, but the measures we already have. But things like air quality definitely does have an impact on the economic level of this for sure. Absolutely.
So realistically, we just keep the wind blowing, then we're going to
Yeah.
be able to grow the economic.
Well, Bob, I think a key is these are all future projections with the exception of safety and state of good repair and reliability using existing data. So I think there's a difference between what we're doing here, which is trying to forecast clean air and emissions through our modeling tools, and then perhaps maybe Mayor or Commissioner, what you're speaking to, which is monitoring the existing system through like DAQ has a lot of those sensors out. There's one at Hawthorne on 7th East in Salt Lake, for instance.
Yep.
Network throughout the state that the University of Utah also manages through its meteorology department.
Very good point. Thank you. Anything else? Thank you for your time.
Bob, thank you very much. Maybe, and I'll use this as a transition to our next item. You had economic vitality up there. Commissioner Stevenson highlighted. I should mention to all of you that all of the transportation agencies, along with several of our partners in GOPB, Chambers of Commerce, Gardner Policy Institute, are working together to update something that we have done every year when we do every cycle, when we do the Unified Transportation Plan, and that is an economic impacts analysis. What will it mean to the state of Utah economically if we implement the Unified Transportation Plan? We do this every time, but we're actually looking to enhance it. We're going to be putting out an RFP, a shared RFP, to get some consultant assistance. And that is something that we can talk about, I think, at a future JPAC meeting in a little more detail. Okay. Okay. Last item on the Unified Transportation Plan is policy considerations. I'm going to turn to Ted Knowlton to talk about this with one intro point, and that is, I said this already, but the way that we address transportation is not just by building new stuff. It's not just by adding capacity to our system. There's a whole range of policy approaches that can be taken to enhance mobility and the performance of the transportation system. And with that tantalizing intro, Ted.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Rosie, will you bring that presentation back up, please? I'm just going to present from my seat because then I can look at you in the virtual world. So trying to navigate that. I'm just pause. There we go. Wow, I was filling time. All right, so to go to the next slide, if you would, to elaborate on what Andrew was talking about. So if the fundamental purpose of transportation is to help us accomplish the things we need to accomplish in a day or a week or what have you, we can do that next by, next please, by building roads, transit lines, trails, next. We can do that by, for the facilities we already have, can we help people use them, have them move more people? Thank you, thank you. So, you may know the theory of a freeway ramp meter. You're holding people from getting on and you're metering them on, and the purpose is you're helping the main line, the interstate, be less congested, which actually helps you move more people. So it's a really cost-effective way to get more utility out of what you have. And then there's also things that we can do that just enable people to choose to engage in things that help them get things done, but in ways that don't create as much traffic. And I'm just give you two very generalized examples. One is, well, what if people don't have to drive as far? Or what if people have choices for bicycling or more choices for public transportation? They can choose that. Those are a couple of ways. So what we do have done in the last cycle of the Unified Plan, and that we are proposing to do in this cycle of the Unified Plan is, hey, we're certainly going to put together our package of projects and capital improvements and changes of operations for transportation facilities. In addition, we want to put together little vignettes of, here are different ways that local governments, all the way up to state government, could explore that help people get things done in ways that don't create as much traffic. And so you can see these in here: fast and frequent, no fare transit, one-stop shop transportation. That means people could choose Uber, Lyft, transit. They have a variety of options, very easy. Connected and autonomous vehicles, taking advantage of new technology in that way. Managed motorways. It's sort of the example of the ramp metering, but at a very large scale. Road usage charges. People pay based on their usage of our transportation facilities. Major active transportation investments like trails and bikeways. Community planning, new growth and infill development that help origins and destinations be closer to each other so people don't have to travel as far. And congestion pricing, pricing mechanisms that help people choose to travel off the peak or take other forms of transportation when our roads are most congested. These are presented in the unified plan in the last time right now as these are pathways to the future. The unified plan doesn't say, hey, we ought to do A, B, C, or D. It says these are really good ideas. Now let's understand them. I'm telling myself next slide as if I have multiple personalities. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just highlight 5 of these. 5 of these. And then on each, if anybody has a question or comment, would love to hear that just for a minute on each before I hand it back to our chair. And the first one is one that is getting a lot of attention. Fast, frequent, and no fare transit. Of course, there was a big pilot just last February that saw a significant bump up in transit usage when the fares were on a temporary basis were free. What is happening right now is that MAG, UDOT, UTA, and WFRC are studying this. Let's seek to understand what the pros and cons are, what the forecast might be. I happen to be sitting right next to Trustee Christensen, which I swear was not on purpose or what wasn't planned in advance, but it's a good accident. So Trustee, do you want to elaborate on this?
Thanks, Ted. And because I show up under Ted's name, I'm under the witness protection program. So just in case, I do know that there was we were going to show something, Muriel, and maybe if I could swap out for just a second with Muriel, let Muriel share. But while she's bringing that up, we presented to the Transportation Interim Committee, Andrew did on behalf of the 4 groups that make up this study process. But I just asked her to show this one slide, and it shows the impact or the magnitude of increase in ridership based on a pricing model. And for study purposes, they chose just one mode in the sense of bus only. If we just had something that was geared, which we currently do have a little bit toward the low income group, or just if you reduced it down. And part of the challenge as we look at it from both a policy and a logistics standpoint is that the actual process of collecting fares takes about 25% of the fare to go through that process in the collection of it. And for us as an agency, and many of our sister agencies, for example, have 0 fare scenarios themselves already. But for us, we're at the verge of having to contemplate whether to buy a new fare collection system. Ours is at the end of its life, and over 10 years, it's about a $40 million commitment on our part. And so if there was a consideration or some kind of a test period and hopefully longer than a month, for us as an agency, this would be the time for us to do that. We haven't procured a new system, although we've been going through that process. And so we're looking at it. We think it will it'll be very helpful to have that conversation. And what came after February, for example, in our commuter rail is that we had not only did the ridership stay, but it has continued to grow, as have some of our other modes.
So Carlton, there's been so much focus on this that I don't want to take too much time, but I do want to stay here for a minute.
Sure.
You're saying that when in the free fare February that happened, there were notable ridership increases at that time, right?
There were.
Yeah. And then they've actually persisted to some significant extent, meaning that when people get on transit and they try it out, they often stay and they become longtime users. Is that what I'm understanding you to say?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And interesting, one of the things that happened during the COVID period, but certainly since, is our weekend ridership, particularly Saturday and Sunday, have gone up, which are indicative that it's become more of a lifestyle decision. And as we continue to see in our service area, growth happen, and particularly housing growth around our stations, it's obviously become an integral fabric of how people get around. And even though the commuting patterns have changed some, we've also noticed that our midday ridership is fairly high as well. And so where we once had a peak in the morning and peak in the afternoon in a lot of our system, it has stayed pretty consistent throughout the day, which again speaks to the fact that it's become more of a lifestyle. And our average rider now is 34 and younger.
Yeah.
And so when you look at, I had a friend just yesterday who was lamenting by the fact that they were trying to convince their 15-year-old to get their driver's license. They didn't think he needed to. And in one of our school districts, they've provided all their students passes, and that's become just a big part of their mobility.
Thanks, Carlton. And just while we have this slide on the screen, just sort of to orient everybody here, again, this is the preliminary product of a joint analysis among UDOT, UTA, WFRC, and MAG. You get the theme. We like to collaborate together. And we were asked to do this by the legislature and others about the implications of zero fare transit and possible approaches. And so again, ask you to focus on the left side of the screen here, system-wide zero fare. What you're seeing, the two bars for each of these four scenarios, but all the way on the left, system-wide zero fare, is the projected effect on ridership from going to zero fare completely. And what you see there is a projection, if the whole system was zero fare, no fares, an increase in ridership of between, can't read that exactly, 24 to 35%, or 36%. So zero fare would result, and this is analysis based on studies, other examples around the region. We hired a nationally recognized consulting firm to help us with this analysis, and they project an up to 35 or 36% increase in utilization and ridership with going to zero fare. The cost of that is the next bar. That's that net impact to UTA. And this is basically from replacing lost fare revenue, around between $30 to $35 million. So I guess I'm focusing on this because this was really notable to me. I'm a lifelong transit watcher. The fact that we could potentially get a 35% increase in ridership from a $35 million investment, that is a huge return on investment. So I just wanted to highlight that. We shared this information with the legislature. Where does this go from here? Not entirely sure, but I think this is something that continues to be explored in our state, and it's worth exploring.
I was just
Mayor
going to say,
Silvestrini.
thank you, Andrew. I was just going to say that, the Free Fare February experiment was encouraging, and I actually think it makes sense to experiment for a longer period of time. Our state is making an incredible investment in transit, and we're super hopeful that it's going to provide some solutions to the challenges that we face surrounding growth and congestion, and taking some of the burden off our highway system and hopefully improving our air quality, which is also necessary. So things like this, where we do things that enable us to collect more data so we can say that we know this will work, I think are very important, not only to continue to support the idea of investing in transit, but also to get people to use it, get people like me to use it. That's what has to happen.
Ted, I'm sorry, I sort of took you off track here, but
Thanks, Ted.
Okay, Rosie, you're bringing that back up. Is that right? Okay. So that was the first of five that briefly highlighting. That one needed more attention. I'll just call an audible a little bit, but as an example of a policy move that can really help us maximize our transportation investment is also first last mile. If we can improve the connections that occur between where people live and work and transit, just by sometimes really modest changes to the transportation system right around a station, we can get a lot more riders too. That's an example of optimizing our investment. The next one, oh, I have the thing.
I have a comment for you.
Oh,
This is Brian Cox from up in Cache Valley.
oh, yes. Nice to have you with us now. Go right ahead.
I've been a bit under the weather. I had a road down there, but perhaps when you're talking about that zero fare, although you guys are talking about all the plights on the other side of the mountains, Todd from Cache Valley Transit might provide you a lot of insight on what he's been doing and how successful that program has been working in Cache Valley. So you have an in-house asset that you can utilize for a good base of resource.
Mayor, I'm so glad you said that. And actually, I'm looking at Julie Bjornstad, who was with WFRC, who's the project manager on this study. The analysis has actually looked at examples or factored in examples like Cache Valley and others, Park City in Utah, that have actually implemented zero fare already. Is that right, Julie?
Yes, and the consultant that we're using, Nelson Nygaard, has worked closely with CVTD as they've gone through different rounds of implementation of their zero fare system and rethinking it. And I believe he worked on the last time that question got brought up in the Logan area. So they're very familiar with what's happening in CVTD.
That's great. Mayor Cox, thanks so much for bringing that up. And it's always good to be able to phone a friend with Julie as the project manager, and Muriel from X Factor, who works with Nelson Nygaard also on doing the study. So great.
Okay, I'll take the next two together and then perhaps look to Ben and Andrea if you want to comment on them. The first is managed motorways. I will do an amateur job of explaining this, but if we can help cars move efficiently on our interstates, it actually means we can move more people. So if we can manage the flow onto the interstate and do it in really creative ways, then congestion will not be as big a factor in gumming up those opportunities. And the best example in the world is in Australia. We've been learning from that. Colorado has been working on this. UDOT is in the middle of trying to, I think, gather information about what would this mean in Utah? How would it unfold? What are the pros and cons? Now, a different one is one that is really on track to getting fully implemented already, and that is the road usage charge program. This is a way for us to, as a transportation industry, deal with the declining revenue associated with gas tax as the fleet moves to electric. This helps us charge people based on their usage of a road, do things in an equitable way, like not charge a rancher who's driving on dirt roads for that use, as he does now through the gas tax. And so I hit two at the same time, but they're both in the sort of UDOT world. And I'll pause and see if there's questions by anybody, and certainly Ben and Andrew, if you want to comment on those two.
I'll just comment briefly on the managed motorways. You mentioned looking at that Colorado implementation. We had individuals that were able to go to Colorado, and it was actually, I hope I'm getting this right, but I think it was a pilot from the personnel from Australia were implementing a pilot in Colorado. And it was cool to hear him talk about that. And some of the things that are, I don't know, I'll call them like a little bit on the edge of comfortable, thinking about things like metering a system to system interchange. They were able to see that in Colorado. I saw some of the information that they talked about where they showed some graphs, and they showed a location in Colorado, and then they showed a location in, I think it was the South interchange with 215 and I-15, and the data was very similar. So they were able to kind of say, hey, this is what it potentially would look like. They had a very similar situation that they were able to look at in Colorado. So I'll just give some background there that it was encouraging. It was cool for them to look at that pilot. And as you mentioned, that led into now we just are going to begin an additional study, taking some of that stuff and looking at what it might look like and help inform future actions with that.
Appreciate that. And you can imagine how much less expensive this kind of solution is than adding a lane on an interstate, especially in a constrained environment like the Salt Lake Valley. All right, major active transportation investment. I think we're going to hear a lot more about the statewide trails initiative here just in a minute. I just want to note that when we have surveyed Utahns, they want to bicycle a lot more. The last time we did a big statewide survey, 88% said we want to bicycle more. And of those people, the main reason why they said they don't bike more is that our facilities aren't safe enough. So there's so much we can do in that space, and there's a lot of movement in that. I know we're going to talk about this in just a minute, but is there any question or comment on this one of the 5 that I'm highlighting?
Let's save that until we get there in just a minute.
Sounds
okay.
good.
Yeah.
Sounds good. And so the last of the 5 is this is in the local planning world. So these are cities, towns, counties through their planning and zoning and the patterns of development. We know from data that when more growth occurs in our downtowns and our town centers, when more growth occurs in our transit-oriented communities, that it translates into a per capita reduction in the amount of traffic increase. You follow me? So people don't have to drive as far. They're more apt to bicycle and use transit. And what this means is it makes people's lives better. They don't have to spend as much money or time. And then it has all of these benefits for infrastructure. We're reducing the demands on our system. This is part and parcel of the Wasatch Choice vision. It's certainly part of House Bill 462. It's highlighted in the Unified Plan to help people understand that there's lots of different ways that we can help connect people with the destinations that they want to get to in Utah, and that land use patterns is absolutely one of them.
And
So,
Ted,
yes.
to that point, I'm sorry. Were you?
Yes, please. No, go ahead.
To that point, we don't have enough room nor money in Utah to build enough transportation capacity to deal with the travel demand that's coming from all the growth that we have. One of the most effective strategies to addressing transportation challenges is not actually a transportation strategy, right? Ted, you're saying it's a land use approach. The way we develop, the way we grow, where people live, where they work, the fabric of our communities in of itself has a huge impact on the demand on our transportation systems. And so like you have to wrap your mind around this reality that we don't deal with transportation just by building more transportation capacity. It's the embodied, as you said, in the Wasatch Choice vision, but it's something we need to be thinking even more and more about as we grow and we run out of land in Utah on which to grow.
Yeah, and one slight elaboration on this is it's not just about areas with transit.
Yeah.
So, more growth in downtown St. George is going to have less traffic production than growth outside of downtown St. George. So this is true for rural areas. This is true for every community there is. It's amplified if you have that transit tie-in, but it's not a requirement. So those are the 5 that we've highlighted before. Just any comments in general on this idea of highlighting the policy space that help us together connect people with where they want to go, that perhaps augment our focus also on building projects as we wrap up. Or anything that like you think, oh, it would be neat if fill in the blank, or have you thought about X or Y? Because we're putting together the game plan for what this means in the next unified plan, and any advice you've got on that is certainly most welcome. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Any comments? Yes, Commissioner Fackrell.
Question. In all of this planning, are you thinking of the Are you thinking of the connectivity between cities such as maybe Box Elder or Brigham City to Logan? Or Ogden to Morgan, or, you know, some of those kinds of things? Are you thinking in those areas, or is it just a pipe dream?
I think that's part of the beauty of Utah's Unified Transportation Plan is that we have this coordination between UDOT's planning for rural areas, planning for the urban areas. How do we make these connections? Where is growth happening? How do we help keep our freight moving? All of these things. And that is about connecting growing areas and not just what happens in urban areas. Did that get at your question? I think we're working on that.
Yeah, I'm just looking at, I know that between Brigham City and Logan is a huge traffic. It's not a congestion yet, but going up over Sardine is a mess. And especially when you get into the winter, it's very difficult. And I see a lot of, you know, as a concerned parent, I look at that also as the fact that I have students or I have kids that might be traveling up that way. And if there was a way that they could get from one place to another part of the state in, you know, a safer avenue would be a wonderful thing.
So I might add, is Jeff Gilbert, are you on? Because I know in Cache Valley, the CMPO, we're collaborating with UDOT on a study for that transit corridor. And when you say traffic in Sardine, that's perspective. So it's not a good sight, especially at this time of year. But Jeff Gilbert, if he's on, probably could lend a little bit to the traffic study that is currently being undertaken with the CMPO and UDOT.
Yeah, certainly that issue's been raised a lot by folks up here, and the study is looking at that. What are the feasibility of it and the timing and sequencing? It's a big issue. It's a tough issue though, because a lot of the trips, once they go to the Wasatch Front, get spread out. So it's trying to figure out where to connect to the UTA system.
So Beth, Ted, and Carlton, I have a question for you on the same line. Is that I've traveled back and forth to St. George a couple of times, and actually again tonight, and I was just amazing the amount of traffic during different times along that two-lane. And I'm not sure if they're hearing this. Anyway, my question is there any talk? I mean, I think there's been some projections that in 15, 20 years, Washington County, that area can be one of the largest population centers in the state of Utah. Is there any talk as far as there being any type of commuter rail all the way between, say, Utah County all the way down?
There is not immediately to St. George, but there is a discussion, and UDOT recently submitted something to the FRA about the possibility of Amtrak service to Las Vegas to the south and Boise to the north. And Amtrak in the most recent legislation received a fair amount of funding to expand their service, and they really are the connecting bodies to towns like that. And the possibility of creating some of those sort of shorter distance, you know, the 450 mile distances. And so I think it is inevitable at some point and would make a lot of sense. And at some point, you know, if rail service ever provided into Washington County would certainly, I think would be a big draw for a lot of folks who don't necessarily want to drive the distance, but want to go there.
Myron is the executive director of the Dixie MPO. Do you want to comment on this, Myron?
Yeah, we have contemplated rail through Washington County in the past, and it doesn't come without challenges to go from a 5,000 foot elevation in Cedar City to a 3,000 foot elevation in St. George. taking a rail line at a 1% grade it poses some challenges. That being said, UDOT has just gone through a planning process with the rural areas, and they're hearing an increasing interest in having transit throughout that region. And so we're beginning to explore the possibilities of doing a transit authority in that area. Things are progressing. We're trying to wrap our heads around what that would mean in the future right now, and we are looking at it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ted, for going over all of that. We're going to move on. The remaining items on the JPAC agenda are state and federal legislative or congressional updates. So we'll move through this all relatively quickly. And we're going to start with something that we're really excited about is the governor's announcement of a statewide trail initiative. And we're going to go to Ben Hewitt from UDOT to talk to us a little bit about this. Ben.
Thank you. So I'll just go over this fairly briefly. I know everybody in the room has a handout in front of them that's got a little one pager. Yeah, there it is coming up on the screen as well. So I'll just hit some of the highlights. So as Andrew mentioned, the governor and Carlos Braceras announced this idea or initiative at the end of October, and it's the basis of it is a Utah Trail Network. And some of the high points that are listed on this information here, the vision is to build and maintain a network of trails to connect communities, connect people. I think one of the keys on this is that there's a lot of existing trail work out there. There's a lot of, local municipality trails, cities and counties have done a great job of doing those. This would be, the goal of this would be to try to make some additional connections and tie stuff together and do it more on a state level. So I think some of the keys down in the blue portion of the sheet on how this might look, and I'll talk a little bit about there's some steps left here, but the initial ideas are to create an ongoing funding source to help make this happen. And then, in our terms, I guess we would see that as creating a program. So you have an ongoing funding source and you have dedicated resources that focus on that. Because I think what has happened in the past, is, I guess for us anyway, for UDOT is the trails have been kind of one-offs and associated with a specific project and stuff. This would be its own, standing program. And then the last part is just talks about some of the key, the key goals and the key points. We've talked a lot about all users. We've talked about transportation choices, enhancing quality of life. I mean, this hits all of those. All of those things are converging. I think Ted maybe mentioned it about hearing. There's been a lot of we've heard a lot that this is what people want. I know that in some of our initial rollouts of the Transportation Investment Fund active transportation projects, that's some of the most volume of comments that we got on, as we're working through programming those types of projects. There was a lot of support articulated to those projects. So steps forward for this is kind of the vision. It's pretty broad and not a lot of details. Next steps would be governor's budget. So seeing how it fits within the governor's budget, and then from there going through the legislative process to hopefully get that dedicated funding source and set up the program and go from there. But like you said, exciting and very much looking forward to where it goes.
Ben, thanks. And that's actually a perfect segue to our next thing, which is Lanice is going to give us a little preview of the upcoming legislative session. But I'll just make a brief comment about this. We started with the Unified Transportation Plan. The Unified Plan looks at driving and transit and active transportation, meaning trails, biking and walking as a means of transportation. This is so exciting, this proposal from the governor for a statewide trail network. I think that if we can get this done in this upcoming legislative session, the dedication of a program and ongoing funding and staffing to focus on this at the state level, to complement what's happening at the local level, that we will look back on this 5, 10, 15, 20 years in the future as a pivot point. And we will say it was the right thing for Utah to make a real commitment to trails and biking and walking as a means of transportation for the whole state. So I'm really excited about this. Commissioner Fackrell.
On this trail system, is the idea to have it be a paved trail system?
Yes, generally, yeah, paved trails. Yep.
Yeah, this is more about transportation than it is about recreation, even though using a bike for transportation is fun. So, Carlton.
Definitely an overlap with, us as a transportation agency. We're going to focus on the transportation. There's always the overlap. If you have a trail, it can be used for recreation as well, but I think the focus is the transportation aspect of it.
I was gonna say that would make it nice for everybody to come and visit Morgan up through the canyon to visit us.
There you go.
Well, I'm sure their creative minds are already at work, but they ought to consider, car rental and hotel taxes. A small incremental thing. Nobody ever really notices those when they check out. I mean, they are what they are, and it would be a robust source to do this. And I think even though it does have a transportation connection, it has a broader effect, and it'd be a good way for others to participate in our effort.
Good thought. Thanks, Carlton. Okay, great. So more to come on that. As Ben said, the next step is the governor will release his proposed FY24 budget sometime in the next few weeks. So stay tuned on that. We'll talk about it a lot over the next few months. Okay, Lenise Davenport from MAG is going to give us a little preview of the upcoming legislative session. Lenise.
Thank you, Andrew. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Rosie. I just have a really quick introduction to the session that's coming up. On the slide here, you can see a few key dates. Essentially, as we all know, the session is starting very, very soon, in about a month and a half, on January 17th. All of our lives will be immediately taken over by legislation, which is really exciting, actually. And then a few dates within this deadline after January 17th. So the end of January is essentially when you can expect all bill files to be released. And the end of February is when you can essentially expect to see all appropriations bills to be released. So the session moves really quickly throughout the next 45 days once it begins. And then the last day is March 3rd, 45 days. The governor then must sign or veto all of the bills by that March 23rd deadline. And then effective date for most bills is May 3rd. So just a quick timeline for big events to happen through the legislative session. On the next slide, let me notice, I'm sorry, thank you. A couple other important things you'll see up there, the interim dates that were held May through November. Of course, a lot of important conversations taking place over the last few months during interim, a lot of this during interim committees, as well as like the Utah Economic Opportunity Commission and the subcommittees of that committee. So a lot of work and conversations are already taking place on transportation and land use and housing and tax cuts, and we have a surplus. We have a revenue surplus, and thanks to Miranda, it's about, I think, to the numbers from Miranda. Thanks, Miranda.
Miranda's been shopping a lot.
Everybody wants to be friends with Miranda. Miranda released in her update the $130 million surplus in the general fund. So that's where I'm pulling that number from. So thank you. So we have a surplus, and lots of people are working very hard on figuring out how to spend that money. But the governor's budget, as Andrew mentioned, will be released hopefully really soon. We're hoping within the next week or so, and that will give us some more sort of ideas on the public education, higher education, and of course, state programs on what the funding will look like within those. And then on that next slide, just really quickly, the one-time monies we just talked about, housing and land use, again, seem to be of high import for this legislative session. So similar to last session, tax reductions and water are also being discussed. And finally, nothing new for this group. All of the transportation partners and everybody around the table are really great about coming together when it comes to talking about transportation related legislation and issues and opportunities. So that of course will continue, and look forward to that.
Lenise, thanks. And I'll just note two things. One on the one-time, well, the revenue surpluses. Income tax collections are higher this year than they were projected to be, and they're projected to continue to go up next year. Sales tax, and that mainly goes into education. Sales tax collections really since mid-pandemic have been just going gangbusters, new economy, et cetera, et cetera. And they're higher this year than projected, and are projected again next year to continue climbing. So there are significant surpluses both in that income tax fund and then also in the general fund. Carry over from this year and then into next year. There is also a significant concern about our economy turning nationally into recession. So there is a hesitancy, and this has been true actually for a few years, for the legislature to make any commitments of ongoing financial obligations, right? Establish something this year that would require ongoing payment indefinitely, which means that the focus, the energy financially in the legislature is going to be around one-time expenditures. There'll be money to spend that doesn't result in long-term commitments. So more to come on that. That's going to be interesting, and there's a lot of opportunity, I would say there. The only other thing I want to mention, one particular item that should be from a transportation perspective on everybody's radar here, we've talked about this before, is the so-called fifth local option transportation sales tax. Most of you know that much of the funding that goes for transit and also for local government transportation comes from these local option transportation sales taxes that are authorized by law and then imposed at the county level. They're a little different on the Wasatch Front than they are off of the Wasatch Front, given where there's transit and where there isn't. But there is one local option that is authorized in law that has only been imposed in one county in the state. And that's this 0.20 local option. We sometimes refer to it as the fifth. Don't ask me to explain that, but it's this local option of 0.20 that is authorized by law. Only Summit County has imposed it. It's eligible to be used 100% of that 0.20 for transit, okay? But only Summit County has imposed it. It expires, the legislative authorization for it expires June 30th of 2023, next year. And so we have had conversation through the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission and others. I'm looking at Beth because she's involved in a lot of these conversations, as are many of you, that at the very least, that deadline needs to be modified, either pushed back or eliminated, so that tool that exists doesn't disappear. In addition, there has been significant dialogue about potentially modifying that 0.20, or maybe creating an alternative approach where if a county wanted to impose the 0.20 and use it all for transit, as the law says now, they could, or if they wanted to take an alternative approach and impose the 0.20 and have it be split among transit, city, and county, that would be another approach. So that there's dialogue about that. I will just say personally, I'm not expressing a position of our agency, right? But maybe we'll get there soon. But at the very least, we've got to deal with this deadline. And I think there's a lot of value in considering an approach that divides up that 0.20 to bring all the stakeholders to the table. This is something that we talked about with Davis COG. Beth and Cameron Deal and I went to Davis COG. We're actually going to WACOG, Weber Area COG on Monday. So this is something that is going to be discussed in the upcoming legislative session. We think it's an important issue in the transportation funding space. Okay. And as we go through session, all of our agencies in your areas of the state are going to be sharing information and looking for your input and highlighting areas where you have an opportunity to go to the Hill and make your voices heard. So more to come on that. Okay. Anything else on state legislature coming up? Looking online? No. Okay, let's go to Washington, shall we? We have a brief update with a federal and congressional look ahead. And we're going to start with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Laura Hanson, our friend from GOPB, is going to, who we like to lovingly refer to as the infrastructure czarina, is going to give us a little bit of update on IIJA in Utah. Laura.
Thank you so much. Laura Hanson, Governor's Office of Planning and Budget. I prefer Empress.
Empress.
Yes.
Okay, you're looking for a promotion. Huh?
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Yeah, so some of you may know, and I feel like I've done this once already today, so it's a little bit of a repeat for some of you, but the White House asked every governor to appoint somebody in the state, in their states as the infrastructure implementation coordinator for that state to kind of help facilitate communication. And really, I think it was an effort or a recognition that all of these federal dollars really get implemented at the local level. And so having somebody to help facilitate those communications is needed. And so I drew the short stick and got that job. Really, my role, I don't think, is in micromanaging or telling people what to apply for. It's really centralizing communication and facilitating coordination. And so we've got a great structure set up within the state, including kind of coordination leads that are really relationship managers. So there's someone kind of a rural coordination lead, a tribal coordination lead, a public lands coordination lead, higher education coordination, public-private partnerships. But then we also have implementation leads, and Ben Hewitt from UDOT over here drew the short stick on being the transportation funding category lead. And then we have similar people in different positions for energy and broadband and cybersecurity, a variety of different topics. And so I meet monthly with staff from the White House and infrastructure coordinators from around the nation. It's a great opportunity to ask questions, get information about things, and also to voice concerns. And so as you all are contemplating grant proposals, if you run into a big issue that you would like to, have me raise or take back, chances are some other state is also facing the same question. And so there's an opportunity for us to kind of partner with other states and maybe submit a letter requesting flexibility or an adjustment. And then in terms of transportation, we had a great meeting this morning that caught me by surprise a little bit because I had some logistical issues, but we got together a variety of folks in the transportation space that are interested in pursuing some of these grants. And it was a great forum for just sharing information, making sure that we're all aware of who's going after what. I think the thing that we want to try to avoid is competing against ourselves when we can. The more partnerships we can build, I think it shows better on competitiveness, but also it gives us the opportunity to leverage our local dollars. And we want to make sure that, we're just aware of what we're doing and supporting one another, building those coalitions. So anyways, that's all I have.
Laura, thanks.
Also, we have a website. Sorry.
Thanks. Oh yeah. And Laura, you can drop
I'll
the info about
drop
the
it in the
website
chat.
into the chat. And I'll also just note, we've got our friends, Ivan and Brigitte and Jennifer from FHWA, who are terrific partners to help Utah navigate through the processes with the IIJA. So thanks. A lot of great teamwork there. If anybody has any questions, feel free to raise them now or ping any follow-up with any of us in the agencies. But in the interest of time, we're going to go on. We got two more things we're going to do real quick here. One is Miranda is going to give us a little status update on the federal budget. And then we're going to go to Ryan Levitt to talk a little bit about what we can expect in the lame duck and also looking ahead to next year in Congress. So Miranda, on the budget.
Perfect. I'll just be brief on this, but some of you may have remembered a little bit earlier this year at the end of the federal fiscal year, Congress failed to pass a budget and passed a short-term, continuing resolution to fund the government until December 16th. So Congress has a few more weeks to pass their budget, or they, can pass another short-term resolution or, risk shutdown again. And so, as Andrew said, the lame duck Congress, who is, has to get some big things done before the end of the year. They have yet to reach top line spending dollar agreements at least from the last that I've checked, that may have changed as things happen quickly back there. But ultimately, what we are probably going to see is that Congress may push past that 16th deadline and may just end up getting to an agreement close to the Christmas holiday, maybe sometime around the 23rd is what's kind of being reported right now. So we'll hopefully see something. Some are pushing to push it off to the next Congress so that they can make these budget decisions. Some are wanting to retain that in this Congress and make those decisions now, but ultimately we'll wait and see. One other thing to note that just happened yesterday is that the House actually voted to retain the ability to use earmarks. So as many of you may know, over the last several years, earmarks weren't really a tool that was used in Congress. And now, given last year and maybe the year before, has it been 2 years now? 2 years now that they've been using this tool, and now will continue to use it for the next Congress as well.
And
Just
that's
in the
relevant because we have a
House.
new majority coming in,
Right.
Republican majority in the House, and they decided, yeah, under Republican control in the House, they will continue doing the earmarking process.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, only in the House, not in the Senate. At least it hasn't been in the years past. And so we'll probably won't see that as well. Anyways, Ryan will have a lot more helpful things to share.
Yeah, so I just want to reiterate, Miranda's correct. Typically what happens, in terms of the lame duck, once they come to an agreement on what the top line numbers are, it takes about 2 weeks for the Appropriations Committee to prepare the bill for passage. So at this point, where everyone's expecting that the funding deadline will move to the 23rd of December. And what's just become somewhat of a congressional tradition, we will probably have votes up to almost to Christmas Eve. So there's a lot of optimism that they're going to reach a deal and that we will fund the government through next fiscal year. Another issue that is being addressed by Congress at the moment is the impending potential rail strike. There's a labor dispute with freight rail, and that could have major impacts for a wide sector of the economy. And the White House has been negotiating that, and we anticipate that Congress will not leave for the year before codifying some agreement between the rail and the labor unions. Moving on to next Congress, I'm sure you've all paid attention post the election. We see now that we're going to have a divided government with the House of Representatives slipping to GOP control. They're going to have a very narrow majority, probably a 4-vote majority, which does not provide any latitude for the Republican leadership in the House. So what we expect to happen next year is to have a real difficult time getting spending bills passed because the Republican majority really can only lose 4 votes. In the Senate, we're probably going to have a 50-50 or a 51-49 split. So very narrow majorities in both chambers. And what that in practice looks like is there will be challenges passing, spending bills, including issues related to the debt ceiling and other matters. And we're also going to see anything that passes the Congress will be very much consensus driven, like we have seen this year. We won't have any more opportunities for reconciliation bills or party line votes. They all have to be done by consensus, and it'll have to be non-controversial provisions. And so somewhat of the status quo of what we have in this current Congress. We anticipate, likely an increase in executive action by the White House because Congress will be a difficult player to work with. And as Miranda mentioned, we anticipate the opportunity for public entities to request congressionally directed spending or earmarks. That was somewhat in doubt because the House GOP conference took some votes on whether or not they would allow earmarks to move forward or they would ban them, but they overwhelmingly supported keeping them in place. So that's sort of a preview of what we're going to expect. It basically looks like gridlock and some bipartisan deals reached on somewhat non-controversial issues. I don't anticipate we'll see anything, landmark legislation or anything that will be controversial policy-wise. So that's it. Any questions? I'm happy to answer them.
Ryan, thanks. I'll just emphasize a little bit of what you said, and then let's see if anybody wants to talk about this anymore. First of all, you didn't even mention the fact that we have the presidential election coming up and all the dynamics and drama that affects the congressional process from that. And then you did mention just how narrow the margin will be in the House. Kevin McCarthy presumably becomes the speaker with probably a 4-vote margin. And what that means, of course, is that in order for McCarthy to get anything passed without Democratic support, he can lose very, very few members from his body. And that means that he has to be really careful to make sure he keeps the far right wing of his party on board. And I think that's gotten a lot of focus, right? But on the flip side of that, the way that the House flipped back to Republican from Democrat is not by far right members winning, it's by moderate Republicans winning over Democrats in districts that actually went for Biden. So those members are going to have a tough time getting on board if they want to stay reelected. They want to get reelected, staying on board with proposals that hew to the right. So, get your popcorn. It's going to be really an interesting political drama to watch unfold in the House and then the government writ large over the next 2 years.
And sorry, Andrew, I just want to add some more color to that. So Kevin McCarthy is not yet elected speaker. In fact, he's still got to win about 34 Freedom Caucus members over. And so that's already impacting the lame duck session. The Republicans have walked away from the negotiating table on the year-end spending bill because McCarthy's trying to garner support from that conservative wing. So we're already seeing that play out. The drama next year is already playing out now as he's trying to prepare to be elected speaker. I see in the comments, Trustee Acerson asked about student loan forgiveness. I'll answer quickly. For those who are not following this closely, President Biden announced via executive action that he was going to forgive student loan debt at about $10,000 per borrower, or $20,000 for those who had received Pell grants. That was immediately challenged in the federal courts. Right now, the Eighth Circuit and the Fifth Circuit have both stayed that. We anticipate this is probably going to have to be addressed by the U.S. Supreme Court. If I have to prognosticate on what is going to happen, I anticipate that the student loan executive order forgiveness, student loan forgiveness is going to be rejected by the courts. And ultimately, if something like this is going to move forward, it's going to have to move forward via congressional action. And based on the current makeup of the next Congress, I think it's extraordinarily unlikely that we'll see any sort of broad sweeping student loan forgiveness. That's my thoughts on that.
Who else has comments or wants to ask Ryan to prognosticate on things? Carlton?
Ryan, do you think that say some moderate Democrats, maybe moderately just right of center, would play a role in a lot of legislation and that consensus thing? I mean, is there a place there for a group to sort of step forward and almost control the discussion because of that margin?
Yes, absolutely. So I think what you're going to see is, just like we saw this Congress, the most powerful group were the sort of centrists, the folks like Joe Manchin and somewhat our Senator Mitt Romney here in Utah. Basically, those who are willing to work constructively across the aisle and build a coalition of, consensus-driven folks, that's where you're going to see legislation take place. Not different than the infrastructure bill that we saw, or the CHIPS bill, or there was some firearms, safety legislation that was passed. Some pretty remarkable legislation was passed in a Congress that was so narrowly divided. And that's because when there's a group of sort of centrist or, consensus or, solutions-based people that want to get together and form a coalition bipartisanly, they're able to get a coalition that can pass a bill through Congress. So I do think that we'll see that. Trustee Christensen, I think so.
So Ryan, tomorrow night when those liberal Californians get together against those conservative Utahns, you got any guesses on how that's going to come out on that
In the
vote?
Pac-12 championship? Well, I hope it's a Utah victory. They already beat them once this year, so I hope they can do it again.
Well, Ryan's open for prognostication on just about anything, apparently.
Well, I just said I hope they win. I don't know what'll happen.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Any other, I don't know, World Cup commentary or anything anybody wants to offer here?
I've got slide off, but thank you, everybody.
Hey, we don't say anything.
There's
Oh,
a comment.
here we go. We've got your friends are on here.
Yes,
Oh,
we can't be two places at once.
Yeah, we have important meetings here with Levitt.
Well, that's a great group. You guys take care of Mill Creek, please.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Okay, yeah, and Brigitte was just noting that just a few minutes ago, the Supreme Court agreed to take the case on the student loan debt forgiveness. So interesting. Yeah, lots of interesting things going on. Okay, that brings us to the end of our agenda, unless anybody has anything else that they want to share or bring up with the group. Join. You're welcome for lunch. I'd like to say thank you, apropos of that. I want to say thank you to Andrea, who was the organizer for this year's JPAC meetings expertly. So let's give Andrea a round of applause. Oh, and Andrea is reminding me that she doesn't do things alone. And so Rosie Hernandez and Jordan Chandler. Where's Jordan? Is Jordan out there? Jordan, thank you. And next year, again, we're going to continue with our basic rotation approach for JPAC, and it's going to UTA. So UTA, Kathy, thank you in advance for, do you want to say anything about that?
Well, I was going to say, when you see some notes from Kathy, that's the new Andrea.
Right.
And the one that is making it happen along with our rest of our board staff. So.
Okay, great. Well, everybody, keep your eyes open for all the interesting things that are going to be coming up, particularly as we head into the legislative session, as we discussed. And with that, would anybody like to move to adjourn? Beth, okay, that's a non-debatable motion. We stand adjourned, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Happy holidays, everybody.